morning. How are you today? Enjoying this spring-like weather? Unfortunately, I don't think it's here to stay. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lara Santamaria, and I am the Executive Director of Ministry Services here at Fellowship, and I've been on staff here for over 15 years. If you're wondering what exactly that job title means, I'm still trying to figure it out myself. But what I do is whatever it takes to keep this place running smoothly, make sure it's ready for everyone on Sunday, that our bills get paid and our lights stay on, and everything in between. Today, it means that I get to talk to you about something that has been on my heart lately. I want to start by having you do something for me. Take out a piece of paper or pull up the notes section on your phone, and I want you to take a minute and write down 3 positive words to describe yourself. How did you do? Were you kind to yourself? I'm looking for one word in particular. Did anyone use the word extraordinary to describe themselves? No? If you did, you should probably come back next week for the talk on humility. Just kidding. Do you consider yourself to be extraordinary? Do you ever find yourself wondering if this is all there is in this life? You go through the motions each day. Maybe it's dragging the kids around, cooking and cleaning, heading to that unfulfilling job day in and day out. Maybe it's another day of school, then work, or another difficult day, caring for an elderly parent or loved one. Do you ever want your life to be more than just the humdrum of every day? Have you ever wished you could do something extraordinary? I don't know about you, but when I hear the word extraordinary, I often think of a superhero. Someone who has superpowers or is super special in some way. Or I think of someone who has accomplished great things. I asked Google to pull up some extraordinary people, and it came up with a list. The list was from Vogue, and it included people like Stephen King, who apparently received 60 rejections before selling his first story. There was also Oprah Winfrey, who apparently had a harrowingly traumatic childhood, but persevered, finished high school, and got a full scholarship to college, and is now, well, she's Oprah. Finally, Sir James Dyson. Do you know what he did? He was the creator of the bagless vacuum cleaner. Now, I'm not sure that I would consider that to be extraordinary. Apparently, he persevered through 5,126 failures before he even got his product to market. Talk about tenacity. These are people that are thought of as extraordinary, but who started out ordinary like the rest of us. So how can we do something extraordinary? What's holding us back? A couple years ago, I read an article in the Harvard Business Review that studied men and women who were applying for jobs. The study showed that typically men will apply for a job when they meet only 60% of the qualifications. But women will only apply if they meet 100% of them. When I first read it, I was a little skeptical, but then I started really thinking about it, and I saw it play out in my own life. A couple of years ago, in the spring, when my son Marcus was 18 at the time, he came to me and said, "Mom, my friend Michael and I are going to start our own business." I was a little surprised, but he had other friends who had started summer lawn and landscaping businesses, so I didn't think too much about it until I asked, "What are you going to do?" And he replied, "We're going to start a boat detailing business." At first, I actually thought he was joking. We never had a boat when he was growing up, and at that point, he had been on a boat maybe 4 times in his lifetime. But he was dead serious. So I asked him, "How are you going to learn how to detail boats?" And he replied, "YouTube." Now, I'm sure we've all used YouTubes at times to learn things. I tend to go there when I'm trying to start a piece of equipment like a leaf blower or a snow blower that I don't use very often. But to base your entire business on what you learned at the school of YouTube seems a bit chancy. I was pretty nervous about it at first, and I had very little faith in their ability to do this successfully. What if they failed? Or even worse, what if they ruined someone's boat? But they had confidence in themselves and their ability to learn. They watched YouTube videos. They got in touch with someone who did this for a living in Florida and ran a nationwide business, and he gave them advice. To my surprise, they were very successful. In the 2 summers since they started, they have become a licensed business, gotten insurance, they have business cards, a Facebook and Instagram page, and a website. They've gotten well known enough for their abilities throughout the local marinas that the marina owners are giving out their name instead of recommending their own guys. They didn't worry about being 100% qualified before they started. In fact, I think they were probably about 5% qualified, and only because they'd washed a car before. Now, I might be a bit biased, but I think what they did was a little extraordinary. So why are some of us so afraid to try things? I'm sure we've all had thoughts of something we'd like to do, but we're afraid to move forward. I've always loved to bake. When my kids lived at home, there was always something baked on the counter. Cake or cookies, death by chocolate, scones, bread, something yummy. I was thinking about this the other day, and I realized that that's how I show love. Have you heard of the book, The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman? It's a great book. But I personally think there are 6 love languages, and the 6th one is baking. If I love you, I've probably baked something for you. When my kids left home, I struggled with the empty nest syndrome that many parents of adult kids have. And it was really hard the first year. But one of the hardest parts was I had no one to eat my baking. My husband could only eat so much, and things kept going to waste. I actually stopped baking for a while, but I was pretty unhappy about it. Then I started thinking about starting a side cookie business. At Christmas, I'd always baked tons of cookies for my husband to take to work, platters of them, and people raved about them. So I thought, why not? But for me, for a long time, that's where the thought stopped. All I could think was, I can't do that. I'm not a professional. That won't work. I'm not good enough. What was I afraid of? Failure? Inability? The unknown? I mentioned these thoughts in a conversation with my husband one day, and he said, just try it. What's the worst that could happen? So why do we feel that we need to start off as extraordinary to do anything meaningful? As many of you know, this past summer, I led a group of 13 people from Fellowship on a missions trip to Costa Rica. Ordinary people who wanted to make a difference in the lives of some children and their families. We headed to Costa Rica in late July after weeks of saving up money, getting to know each other as a team, and prepping for the activities we would lead. While there, we were able to work with the Hope Center through Hope Partners International. They're located in the middle of the most impoverished area of San Jose, Costa Rica, known as Pavas, and they're doing extraordinary things. Costa Rica is not known for supporting nonprofits, and there are very few of them doing work in Costa Rica. But the Hope Center has caught the government's eye. They are slowly transforming Pavas from a dark, dismal place to a place that's bright with color and, believe it or not, joy. The 13 of us were able to have a little part in that when we went into one of the public schools and painted a huge mural in an open area that was otherwise dismal and dirty. Our mural will remind the kids that they are loved, that they are important, and that they are chosen. The Hope Center staff also feeds and serves close to 500 children and their families. They offer tutoring, mentoring, and discipleship for the kids and their mothers. They also offer a summer camp, much like Vacation Bible Camp, each summer. Our group had the pleasure of working with the 3rd and 4th graders each day. We planned activities for craft, indoor games, and outdoor rec. We loved playing with them and teaching them that Jesus loves them and shows them how to love. This was an amazing experience. These kids feel loved and safe at the Hope Center. They are so joyful and loving, and yet they have nothing. They will hug you all day if you let them. They will give you their snack if you let them. They're just joyful and full of love and hope. The center has done this. They offer hope that they can help change the future of these children. The government approached them a couple years ago and actually asked them to open a second Hope Center, and they even gave them the land on which to do it. This is unheard of. They're truly doing something extraordinary. Mary Madonna was one of the people that went with us last year and was very touched by what we were able to do and the children and adults we worked with. Check out what she has to say about the trip.
Last summer, I had the privilege of traveling with a small group from our church to serve at the Hope Center in Pavas, Costa Rica. We were a mixed group containing various ages, from high school students to retirees. We may not have had a lot in common, but we did have a desire to serve. From the moment we arrived in Costa Rica, you could see God's hand at work. Beginning with worshiping at the local church, a church that was super similar to our own, with one minor exception: the entire service was in Spanish. Even with that tiny difference, it didn't matter. The message was clear: God was present and He was working. Our week continued much like our experience at that church, with most of our team using the small bits of Spanish we had picked up while speaking to native Spanish speakers. Truthfully, the children enjoyed it. They really did get a kick out of us trying to say the right thing. But honestly, it didn't matter. We were there to serve, and the children and families we came in contact with knew that and offered such grace. From working at the local school in the morning, removing glass and debris from the bleak schoolyard, to creating a beautiful mural to bring joy to that space, it just worked. Our artist that created the unique design and helped us bring it to life knew no English, but it worked. His smile and nod of approval was enough to encourage us to keep going. And we had amazing interns from the Hope Center and our lead, Lonnie, working right alongside us. In the afternoons, after finishing our schoolyard project, we would move on to the Hope Center, a small but well-loved former church building where we held a small VBS-type program for the children. It was a pure joy. Running around with the kids on their small playground, doing crafts, dancing, playing games, there wasn't a minute where you didn't feel the hand of God in the work. And beyond the amazing children, we were so blessed by those who were running the program. Paula and Lonnie, a husband and wife team, did a tremendous job leading us through the week of projects and play. We felt so supported. Their energy never wavered, and their commitment to the people they served was so apparent. Along with the awesome student interns that served in Pavas for the summer, our team was poured into, along with the children and families. It was such a beautiful experience and completely renewed my passion for the children of our church. Throughout that week, with just a desire to serve, God moved in and through our team. Our team bonded, working together during the day, playing with the kids, laughing with the volunteers, having meaningful conversations during our intern-led devotionals at night. I don't think anyone who has traveled to the Hope Center has left the same person. I know I am personally so grateful for the amazing work that the Hope Center is doing in Costa Rica, around the world, and for the volunteers that visit their centers. I can't wait to go back.
We are still in the process of putting together our team for this summer. So if you're interested in joining us, please get in touch with me this week and we can talk about what is involved. We'll be solidifying our team by the end of the month, so don't wait. So how do we do what the Hope Center has? How do we take our normal and ordinary selves and accomplish something extraordinary? There are a lot of people in the Bible that were ordinary, but they did and accomplished extraordinary things. Take Moses, for example. Moses was tasked with leading the Israelites out of slavery and bringing them to the Promised Land. He's also the prophet who received the 10 Commandments from God. So Moses was clearly a great leader, right? He must have been an amazing speaker. I mean, he convinced 600,000 Israelites to follow him out of Egypt to a place they'd never even seen before. But if you look at Exodus, this was not true. Moses was a simple shepherd. He was actually tending his father-in-law's flock when God came to him. God came to him through a burning bush and told him that he was sending Moses to Pharaoh to lead the people out of Egypt. But what was Moses' response? But Moses protested to God. Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? God spoke more to Moses about what he wanted him to do, almost as if he was trying to convince Moses. But Moses again argued with God in Exodus 4:1. Moses protested, "What if they won't believe me or listen to me? What if they say, 'The Lord never appeared to you'?" Then the Lord asked him, "What is that in your hand?" So what did Moses have in his hand? It was a shepherd's staff. The Lord was going to use it to prove to Moses that with his help, Moses could do extraordinary things with the ordinary things he had. So the Lord had him throw it on the ground, and he turned it into a snake. Then the Lord told him to reach out and grab it by the tail. So Moses did, and it turned back into a staff. The Lord said, "Do this for the people, and they'll believe that God had really appeared to him." But Moses was still skeptical. He continued to argue. So God kept doing the extraordinary with ordinary things. He told Moses to put his hand in his cloak, and when he pulled it out, it was white as snow with a severe skin disease. The Lord told him to put it back in his cloak, and when he pulled it out again, it was clean and healthy as the rest of his body. After much more discussion and arguing with the Lord, Moses went to Egypt and performed the miraculous signs as God had instructed to. Then the people of Israel were convinced that the Lord had sent Moses, and they believed in him. Was Moses an extraordinary man to begin with? No, he was a lowly shepherd. In fact, he was a shepherd that had a possible speech impediment. That was part of his argument with God. He wasn't good enough with his words. God told him that he would put the words in his mouth, as he was the one who made his mouth in the first place. But still Moses argued that he was not good enough. And finally God relented and agreed to let Moses, his brother Aaron, speak for him and be his spokesperson. Moses was an ordinary man that went on to do extraordinary things. And what did it start with? It started with that item that Moses held in his hands. God took something ordinary and allowed a man to do extraordinary things with it. God did many amazing things through ordinary Moses. We see his use of the staff again in Exodus 14. The Israelites were in an uproar. They had fled from Egypt, and the Egyptians were gaining on them, and now they were trapped. They were ready to throw in the towel and go back to being slaves. But once again, God planned to use Moses to do the miraculous. In Exodus 14:13, Moses told the people, "Don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to get moving. Pick up your staff and raise your hand over the sea. Divide the water so the Israelites can walk through the middle of the sea on dry ground." Then in verse 21, Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all that night, turning the seabed into dry land. So the people of Israel walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground with walls of water on each side. Later, as the Egyptians were crossing the seabed, Moses obeyed God and raised his hand again, and the water flooded back in, wiping out and killing the Egyptians. Again, God took someone ordinary and used what he had in his hands to do something extraordinary. While Moses is a great example of this, there are many more great examples in the Bible. I think of the feeding of the 5,000s. The disciples were just ordinary people who followed Jesus and turned to him for all their needs. But when everyone needed to be fed, he told them, "You feed them." They immediately got upset and said, "We don't have the money for that." So he asked them what they had. They had 5 loaves of bread and some fishes that they had gotten from a little boy. So Jesus took what they had and fed over 5,000 people. He used what they had and did something extraordinary. What about David and Goliath? Another shepherd, a mere teenage boy, going up against a literal giant. Even the men in the army didn't want to fight him. David was ordinary in the eyes of those around him, but he used what God put in his hand, which was a little sling, and it made him extraordinary. He knew that with God and the things God gave him, he could do extraordinary things. So you may be asking yourself, how do I do something extraordinary for God? Sure, he used those people in the Bible. He chose them for a reason. They were special. They were worthy to be used by God. When we started this morning, I asked you to write down 3 words that describe you, and I specifically said positive words. That's because many of us automatically think of the negative, or when facing a challenge, we think of the reasons we can't do something. So right now, as I challenge you to do something extraordinary for God, you're probably thinking of all the reasons you can't do it. Let's see if we can address some of those. When faced with doing something extraordinary for God, we need to train our brain to think positively. First, we need to think, I am special enough. Many of us may think that God would never choose us, that we aren't special enough or worthy enough to do something for God. Maybe we feel ordinary or stuck in a rut. Maybe we spend too much time comparing ourselves to others, and that leads us to feel lacking. If God only used people who were special to start with, the Bible would be missing most of its stories because there would be no disciples. Think about all the extraordinary things the disciples did for God. But who were they before he chose them? Many of them were fishermen. That was a very common profession and nothing special. Certainly nothing extraordinary. Matthew was a tax collector. I'm pretty sure none of us would think of our local tax collector as extraordinary or worthy to be used by God. Simon was a politician. I'm not even going to get into that one. And Judas was a thief and an embezzler. All very ordinary. Not one scholar or inventor or king among them. I'm sure all of them felt unworthy at some point in their journey. All sinners, yet all called and used by God in extraordinary ways. Don't let feelings of unworthiness stop you from doing extraordinary things for God. We tend to forget that God specializes in using ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Why? So that when the extraordinary things happen, we realize it's not us, but God. Secondly, you need to think, regardless of my past, God can use me. As sinners, I'm sure many of us have thought our past was too bad for God to use us. We get caught up in remembering our past before we were Christ followers, and we feel unworthy to be used by God. The truth of the matter is, Jesus died on the cross for us, so that this isn't an issue. When we accept him, we are saved, and our past is forgiven. It should not stand between us and doing something amazing for God. This is shown in the Bible as well. There's several examples that come to mind. I think of Rahab the prostitute, who God used to save the spies sent by Joshua. Her past was not one to be proud of, but she didn't let that stand in the way of her doing something. She had courage that led to the salvation of her family. Remember Paul, who started out as Saul? Acts 9 tells the story of how it started for Saul. Meanwhile, Saul was uttering threats with every breath and was eager to kill the Lord's followers. So he went to the high priest. He requested letters addressed to the synagogues in Damascus, asking for their cooperation and the arrest of any followers of the way he found there. He wanted to bring them, both men and women, back to Jerusalem in chains. Saul was uttering threats and trying to kill the Lord's followers. He was not a good person. He was a persecutor of Christians. He was doing everything he could to violently harm and discredit the followers of Jesus. But Jesus turned his life around, and he became Paul and one of the greatest missionaries. He preached across the Roman Empire over 10,000 miles and even appeared before Caesar. He wrote 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament. Paul was out to get rid of all Christians, but his life was turned around and he was vital in spreading the word of God. We're still impacted by it today as we read our Bible. God uses imperfect people for the sake of his mission to bring hope to the world. Our past has nothing to do with our ability to do something extraordinary for God now. Finally, the only way to do something extraordinary for God is to have faith. We need to be faithful with what we have in our hands. What are the gifts and strengths that God has given us? And understand that God can use that to accomplish great things. Hebrews 11:6 says, "And it is impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that God exists, that he rewards those who sincerely seek him." Without faith in God, life has no lasting impact. We will be living our mundane life with no hope of anything better. And without faith, we aren't able to bring joy to God. He commands it, He rewards it, and He takes pleasure in it. In fact, the only time in the Bible that Jesus rebuked His disciples was when they failed to exercise faith. So what is faith? Faith is believing in God, not just intellectually, but also believing in who He is and what He wants to do. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase." This quote reminds us that our faith is a journey, and we often need to step out in faith before we see the complete plan. I think that is often our problem in being afraid to do something extraordinary. We can't see the complete plan, and we're afraid to take that first step without knowing the end result. We need to remember that God knows the end result, and we need to have faith that He can do anything in our lives, even something extraordinary. The 13 people that went to Costa Rica were ordinary people. They listened to God leading them to go and served to the best of their abilities. To serve the children of Pavas with what they had in their hands, the natural skills God had given them. No one on the trip was thought of as extraordinary, but they made the decision to follow Jesus. They made the decision to step out of their comfort zone. They had faith that God could use them to make a difference and help do something extraordinary. One thing that can help us step out and use what God has given us is the encouragement of others. God clearly encouraged Moses, and then He even gave him Aaron to continue encouraging him. The people that went to Costa Rica had others in their lives encouraging them to go, encouraging them to follow God's leading and serve Him with their ordinary abilities. As people who often struggle with confidence and feel the need to be 100% qualified before we do something, we really need to be encouraging each other. Who do you know that has a God-given gift they could use to do something extraordinary for Him? Encourage them. Who do you know with a talent they could use, but they're too cautious to do so? Encourage them. Who in your family could do something that impacts others in a positive way, but is afraid to put themselves out there? Encourage them. So what do you have in your hands? What do you have to work with to do something extraordinary with God's help? Look at the 3 words that you use to describe yourself. Do you have the gift of hospitality? Are you good with children? Do you love to teach or sing or cook or fix things? Do you have the gift of inviting? Are you an encourager? God wants us to be faithful with what He has given us. So what can you do today to be extraordinary? As Christians, let's embrace the fact that our faith is not just a passive belief, but an active force that empowers us to do extraordinary things. Just as many ordinary people in the Bible and famous figures throughout history have demonstrated, we too can overcome challenges, achieve greatness, and make a lasting impact when we have faith and use the gifts that God has given us. My prayer is that we will walk in faith, trusting that with God, the extraordinary is within your reach.